So on to interview, and we've talked a little bit about it. And again, all of this is on my website, which you have the information for, and you can see the details of what we've talked about. So then you want to develop your interview process, there are so many different ways to do interviews. So you need to decide which is best for your organization. There are the panel interviews. When someone's working with a team, you might want the whole team to interview them. You might want to have a management team interview them, and then an employee team interview them. You might want to have a panel of experts, so you've got IT types of things. Well, not everybody that runs an organization and is a business manager knows all the IT technical words, so then you bring in a technical person to be on your team to make sure they answer the questions correctly, that they use the words right, they use the terminology correctly. And so that's helpful to have experts from outside your organization too. And sometimes you bring people from outside just because you want to get a different perspective. You may have the panel be the screening for management, and then the manager gets the top 3 candidates to interview. One-on-one interviews, always good when you're the only one they're working for. One-on-one is probably the best thing to do. The one that I like the best is the round robin kind of scenario. So what you do is have them go to the offices within your organization. So they sit with you as the branch manager, and then they sit with the person that does the business stuff, and then they sit with the head teller. So they have to interview with different people, and you ask different questions than the teller person's going to ask, and someone else asks different questions. They always ask what's most important to them about the person. How would you handle this? Might not be important to you, but it is important to other people. And so by having that round robin, is they've walked into different offices, they also get to know your organization because they're walking around. But that's an excellent way to do it. So you could do a round robin of panels or a round robin of one-on-one to ask questions. And that works really well. The other thing that happens is presentations in interview process. So the universities do this a lot. Someone is going to have to make presentations, if they're a professor, of course. Sometimes teachers have to do that too. But even I did one for a research university, and this person was in charge of the people that are in charge of all the safety issues in all the laboratories and all the stuff that's in a university. And there's a lot of stuff in a university that you do not want to know that your children are exposed to, including radioactive kinds of things, because that's what they have to do in the research organization. So one of the things is they have to talk about those things. So part of their job was to make a presentation. How would they handle these things? Or you give them a topic, or you ask them to talk about their topic and make a presentation. The other thing is, if they can't make that presentation, or they can't go in front of a panel of 10 people in a room, they're probably not your candidate, because that's what they have to do on their job. So those are really interesting. So once you've decided on your format, you set up your arrangements, set up the calendar, get everybody together. That's the hardest part. That usually delays your process because someone's on vacation. And figure out the logistics and all of those kinds of things. So you may do a first interview and a second interview. I've been in places where they've done third interviews because they couldn't decide they had such good candidates. Once you've done the, set up the interview, set up the situation, you want them to be able to ask you questions also. You need to remember they are interviewing you as much as you are interviewing them, especially on that second interview. And that's when you start talking about salaries and start dates and those kinds of things, and the culture and those important things. We also recommend you do background and reference checks. And it depends on the level of the position what you will do. because you don't want surprises in the future. As we've seen there, I don't know if you've had the situation here, but we had it in Connecticut. Superintendent was fired after he said he had his doctorate, which most of them are supposed to have, and no one did a background check to see if he had his doctorate, and he did not. Lying on your application is a no-no. So you want to find out, make sure you don't have any of those surprises. If your person is going to be driving, you want to check their driving record. Are they doing a lot of drunk driving? You don't want them on your vehicles because your liability insurance is going to go like this. Criminal and civil court checks are allowed on positions. Credit check is for anyone that's doing money, and since I do a lot of executive positions, they're all high-level positions. They're dealing with large budgets. We can do credit checks. Remember, under the laws, credit checks only go back 7 years, so that's important. Education verification, definitely. We do the Google check, see if there's anything there. I had a very interesting one come back for that one. And of course, we do reference checks. I did a Google check on this candidate, and I was working with my partner, and he said, "You won't believe what it says." I said, "Okay, tell me." And he said, "Well, it says she's having an affair with the boss, and it's in bold from the newspaper article." I said, "Oh my God." Okay, so he gives me the thing, and you know how some of the newspapers, they do an article about something, and then everybody writes little notes, this was a good article, or it wasn't a good article, or, you know, so someone wrote, "Well, what do you expect? It's such a terrible organization. She's having an affair with the boss," right? So she had never even knew this was on Google. So I had to call her and say, you know, we've got to check this out. This is what's on there. She said, "Have you ever looked at the picture of my boss versus the picture of my husband, who is very good looking? I wouldn't have an affair with him." So someone is lying on the thing, but we have to make sure we told the client that this is out there. Wow. And anyone who's in HR knows there's some very interesting stories out there. So once you've done the reference checks, the completions, then you want to do an offer. Under the ADA requirements, which is again the Americans with Disabilities Act, you have to do a conditional letter of appointment if the position has to go for a physical exam. So truck drivers can't use drugs, and they have to have the test, and then they have to do certain things. Laborers, firefighters, there's a lot of positions that have physical requirements, and so you want to make sure they're going to be physically able to do the job. But you give them a conditional offer and say the offer is good as long as you pass the physical test. Now, a lot of people, because the process takes so long, will give a conditional offer and say, "You're the one we want. We really, really want you, and we want you to tell us that you want to come here. But we still have to do your reference work and your background, and as long as you know that it's all going to come back fine, we'll all be good, and here's what your start date is." So it depends on the organization about those conditional backgrounds. So you want to decide who's on your team for the interview. We talked about the different panel options, all of those things. Once you've decided who's going to be on the team, what kind of interview you're going to do, then you will set that all up for your interviews. And again, this is interviewing for the employer. I do have tips on, if you're going for an interview, I have tips on that too on my website. So if you haven't been at an interview in a long time, that's a helpful one. So you figure out that process, and then you want to prepare questions for the thing. And then, so the first part of the questions you want to do is related to the position. So if it's an HR person, you want to ask them, have they done implementation of family leave? Have they dealt with workers' comp? Have they dealt with benefits? Have they, what kind of recruiting have they done? One of the things I was talking about is sometimes HR directors don't put enough information on their resume, which is very rare, which shouldn't happen because they know what they should be doing, because it's so obvious to the world that they must have done that. But not when you have 100 resumes in front of you. If it's not obvious on your resume, I'm going to go to the next one where it is obvious. So remember that when you're putting your resume together. So talk to your team, talk to people in your organization. What would you ask? If you have an opportunity to do exit interviews with any employees, it's a good time to ask them about their job description, ask them about the organization, and ask them what type of person and what kinds of things would you look for if you were replacing yourself. Many organizations tell you to ask your employees, if you win the lottery and you are leaving your job, who should we hire to replace you? And people love that story because it's like, oh, I definitely would leave if I won the $1 million or whatever. So it's a good way to get an idea on those questions. If the position is supervisory management, you want to definitely ask those types of questions. How would you deal with those? Customer service is top priority in all businesses. How would you handle a irate customer at the counter, or if you're in sales? How did you handle getting someone to finally say yes? Might be a good question. Give them situational questions. One of the best things about doing interviews with an organization is that if they've had this one problem over and over again, and you put that question on the table for them to answer either written, in the written evaluation of the questionnaire, or at the interview table, you'll get some good ideas. So even if you don't hire that person, you might like the idea of how to solve that problem, because everybody's been in different organizations and they've done it different ways, and someone might have the right solution. Always like to solve problems while you're doing an interview. So again, you want to ask those questions related to the position and their specific duties. Then you also want to ask those general questions, and people should be prepared for those general questions. Everybody talks about them. You can go online and say, what should I look at? What should I be prepared for my interview? And all of these general questions will be there. What it does is it gets to their background and their work ethic. So it's important to ask them those questions. Their strengths, their weaknesses, who was their best supervisor and why, what did they like about him, what they disliked the most about one of their jobs, what they liked the most about their job. If someone says they dislike the paperwork and that's all the job is about, you're probably not going to hire them. So that is also important. Asking those in the beginning of the process is also, they expect them, and it will relax them because people get nervous at interviews. So it's a good thing. So like computers, there's all types of programs out there, right? So they may not know your particular computer program or your computer system, but ask them how they learned a new computer system in their last job, because no matter where you're working, everybody's changing their systems, so they've probably gone, unless they're just right out of college, and the college kids can look at a computer and know instinctively what to do. But other than that, the rest of us have to learn how to use a new system, and how did they go through it? What were the problems? Asking people about, what was the positive things that happened with that situation? What were the negative? What did you learn from it? Those are always really good. And I find if someone cannot give you a weakness, they did not prepare for their interview, because everyone has weaknesses. I always remind people to talk about something about your weakness, but how you are fixing it. One of mine that I always use was that, and this is not true now, but in my earlier days, I was very impatient. And I wanted to get things done, and sometimes I moved too fast and didn't think out everything. So I would talk about that as my weakness, but I would also talk about how enthusiastic I am about getting the job done, which is very important, but I'm learning how to slow down and wait a day before I send out that memo. So why you're interested in the position, is this just a job to them, or is this something that they're really interested in? Is it meet their career goals? Where are they in their career life? And ask the person what they know about your position. Now, if they have one of my wonderful profiles and they can't answer anything about the job, then they have not definitely prepared, and you don't want them because they're not a thorough candidate. But if you didn't have a profile but they didn't do any research about it, they're just applying for a job. You want someone who's committed to your organization, to your mission, to your goals, to customer service if that's the important thing, to getting a good product out there. So if they don't know anything about your position, then they are probably just applying for a job. I had a position called laboratory supervisor that I was interviewing for. And so I asked a question about supervising. And the person said, I didn't know this position was a supervisor's position. Mind you, the title says laboratory supervisor. I didn't listen to a single word he said. We asked him all the other questions, but I didn't listen to a word he said, and he was not going to make it on the list. You know, can't make these things up. It really did happen. So did they research about your organization, and do they know about it? And nowadays there's all kinds of sites. I probably don't know all those sites that you can look up a company, but I'm not looking for a job, so if I were, I would go find out what those were. Go to the library, they'll tell you how to find out about someone. So I always give the questions to the candidates. I start with tell us about yourself. I also give the team members that are on the panel or the person who's doing the interview, I give them the resumes of the person and let them know who's coming, and so they have a chance to read the resumes. Because the first question usually says, tell us about yourself, your past experience, why you think you're qualified for the position. So this gives them that opening and says, I have a degree, I have this experience, I have that experience, I have this certification, etc. It also gives a chance for your team, your interview team, to say, why did you only work at company A for 2 years? What happened there? And what does blank and blank mean on your resume? And how many years did you handle management at company B versus not management? Because they may have 2 titles. And they may have only been a manager for 1 year, but it looked like they've been there for 10 years, you know, and so you don't know how many years. So how did you handle those things? So you can ask questions on their resume, because the rest of the questions are going to be about their experience. But this question allows you to go deeper into their resume. Now, by the time I've done an executive search process, I've already learned those kinds of things about them before they have come for the interview. And I usually tell my clients what I've learned from my telephone interviews, my other types of interviews with them. So with the resume in front of them, that helps. You always want to introduce the interview team, the panel. Number one, it's polite and etiquette to introduce that. But it's also helpful, I always tell the candidates up front what the name of the person is, or their title, or both, if I have it. Because sometimes as an outside person, I may not have the names, but I know the titles of the people that are coming. So that if you're applying for a technical position and everyone at the table is technical, you can start using all those technical terms. Well, if everybody at the table is management and you start using technical terms and don't explain them, no one's going to understand what you're talking about. So having that information by the candidate in advance, who's going to be at the team, and introducing them. You know whether you can talk mostly about administrative, management, technical, specific issues, medical terms. You know, if I'm a nurse and I'm taking an interview with a doctor, I better use as many medical terms as I can, right? So in the end of the interview, you should explain the responsibility of the job, the position, the hours, the special exceptions, whether there needs to be flexibility, is there a lot of overtime, not overtime, and ask them if that is okay and if they can meet that kind of situation. And then ask them why they, based on all the information they've learned now that you've had the interview, and based on the interview questions, you know what the job's about. And especially if you ask one of those important problem-solving questions, they know, oh, we've got a problem of that kind here. Why are you the best qualified? So it allows them to sum up the information. And beware of illegal questions. Again, you can go on my website and see those, but basically you can't ask about age, you can't ask about pregnancy, you can't ask about discrimination. If someone has a disability, they, at some point in time, once they have been selected, they have to tell you what kind of accommodation they need. For example, an administrative assistant who has a hearing problem still can do the job as long as you give her one of those telephones with the special hearing thing on it. And you have to do that because the law says so. And we talked about summarizing and an evaluation form. There's 1 million evaluation forms. One of the things I showed you in here was one system that I've used, and people just write notes and give a number, give a letter. Sometimes evaluation forms are every question, and you write a grade on the each question. So then you add it up, or you add, points. I like to have things add up to 100 because then everybody can figure out if they passed. So if they got a 70, they passed the written oral interview exam. So there's many ways to do those evaluation forms.